In New Mexico, water is a critical component of all land activities. But where does our water supply come from? Do we have enough water for future demand? How can we conserve and protect our water supply? These are a few of the questions that we will be discussing as we explore New Mexico's water supply challenges. New Mexico's water supply begins with precipitation that falls in the higher mountains of New Mexico and Colorado. Here, the precipitation rate is greater than the evaporation rate, and thus, water can recharge aquifers and flow into streams and other bodies of water. The mountain ranges of New Mexico and Colorado reach up to 13,000 feet, where temperatures are cold enough to keep our water supply frozen until needed in late spring and summer. But this snowpack is variable and can have dry years, average years, and wet years. This variable snowpack makes stream flows vary as well. The flow in some streams in a dry year can be a fraction of the flow rate in an average year, which in turn is less than a wet year. Because of this variability, in part, we have followed John Wesley Powell's recommendations from 1878 and built reservoirs to store water during wet times for use in drier times. Our largest reservoir is Elephant Butte Dam, with storage of over 2 million acre-feet of water. Our second largest is Navajo Dam, which holds almost 2 million acre-feet. 1 acre-foot equals about 326,000 gallons, or enough water to cover an acre of land about the size of a football field 1 foot deep. Some areas of the state have groundwater available when renewable resources are lower. These groundwater aquifers are typically recharged by adjacent mountains and streams, but some are a long way away from mountains, and the streams that provide recharge can have variable flow. Each aquifer is unique and complex. For example, the water in the High Plains Aquifer is thousands of years old, whereas water in highly permeable Roswell Basin Aquifer is rapidly replenished in just a few years. We divert over 3 million acre-feet of water a year. About half of the supply is from surface water, and the other half is from groundwater. Some regions rely almost exclusively on surface water, and some use only groundwater. How is our water used? In an average year, we use 78% of our water for irrigation and livestock watering. 8% goes to reservoir evaporation, and the remainder is diverted for public water systems, individual domestic wells, mining, and commercial and industrial uses. The New Mexico Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission have kept track of water usage for over 100 years in response to water conflicts and controversies that commenced with statehood. Every water use has a limit on the amount that can be pumped or diverted. Our most recent efforts to plan for New Mexico's future water supply looked at the 16 water planning regions in the state and projected future changes in supply and demand. Our population projections show a potential increase in most areas of the state, resulting in a projected 10% increase in water demand from 2010 to 2060 under a high projection scenario. This amounts to an increased demand of around 425,000 acre-feet of water per year. Most of the projected water demand increases are related to these projected increases in population. But in 2 regions in the northwest corner of the state, water demand is projected to increase based on a 43% increase in water supply. With the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project and the Navajo Indian Irrigation Project, among other federal projects, the population and irrigated acreage are both expected to increase. The Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, authorized in 2009, will deliver 37,800 acre-feet of water through 280 miles of pipeline, delivering much-needed water to industrial plants, water treatment plants, and communities that had no running water in remote tribal lands. The water made available by the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project for irrigated agriculture will increase the demand for water in this part of the state as more farms make use of it. Overall, the demand for water to meet rural and urban community and mining and power needs is projected to continue to increase statewide. Now let's compare supply to demand. How do we calculate supply? It's not as easy as you might think. Not only does the supply change each year, but the physical amount flowing in a stream in one location does not mean it is available for use in that location, or even in New Mexico. If we assume that the amount used in an average water supply year represents the supply, we can compare future demand to this average supply. If we use numerical groundwater models and examine historical water level declines to account for aquifer declines, the projected average water supply will diminish the total water supply by 530,000 acre-feet by 2060. That is over 3 billion bathtubs full of water. This is just one way of calculating our supply. Future planning efforts will need to consider the impacts of climate change on reduced aquifer recharge and stream flow. And this is just the average supply. If we account for a severe drought, the supply decreases even more. So, how does the future look for New Mexico's water supply? Will supply meet demand? When we factor in all of our data, the overall gap between supply and demand for all sectors of water use is projected to be 700,000 acre-feet by 2060 under the high-growth scenario with an average water supply year. But in a drought year, the gap between available supply and demand could be as much as 2.4 million acre-feet by 2060. All regions of the state will be impacted differently in the future. The most severely impacted region is northeast New Mexico, where they face a shortfall of nearly 400,000 acre-feet in an average year and 470,000 in a severe drought. By 2060, northeast New Mexico in an average water supply year will only meet about 26% of demand, and in a severe drought, the supply will only be sufficient to meet 12% of demand. So how do we close the gap so that supply equals demand? To close the projected gap between supply and demand, each community will need to evaluate the options available to them, including water conservation, desalination or produced or brackish water, reuse of treated effluent, and purchase and transfer of water rights. Public water systems also have the ability to enact water conservation measures to reduce overall demand. The average per capita demand by county shows that some communities use much more water than others. If all communities could reduce per capita demand to 130 gallons per capita per day, the gap could be reduced by 44% just for the public water sector. One solution currently under construction is the Eastern New Mexico Rural Water System and the Tucumcari-Quay County Regional Water Authority, which will provide 24,000 acre-feet of water for public water systems in eastern New Mexico. This will help replace the water lost through mining of the High Plains Aquifer. With that solution, we will have closed the gap by another 16% in an average supply year. The Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project will add another 37,000 acre-feet, which closes the gap by another 25%. With these three actions alone, we have reduced the statewide gap by 85%. Even with these examples, a gap of 15% still remains statewide in an average supply year. Some communities are less vulnerable than others, and each will need to understand their options and prepare for the future. The most vulnerable are those communities that have not examined their projected supply and demand. Smaller water systems and individuals on self-supplied wells have fewer resources to investigate the hydrogeology of their region and plan for a better future. Irrigated agriculture will also have to look for solutions to remain viable during future droughts. In this video, we have discussed where New Mexico's water supply comes from, how it is used, what the future supply looks like, and what efforts are being undertaken to reduce the gap between supply and demand for community and commercial water systems. We hope this information will demonstrate the importance and fragility of New Mexico's water supply and will inspire new water conservation projects that will ensure that future generations have the water that they need for their region and their communities.